Madame, Monsieur, bonjour, merci.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for your presence in this room. Please do take seats rapidly so that we can kick off. So we'll have a most interesting session with the various members of the panel, and the purpose of the game is to be interactive and to come to you and to dedicate 10-15 minutes to a discussion with the room. You will have the opportunity to ask all your questions later on at the end of session. And the people who are watching us on the screens, you are in a large number. Channel 2. So it's 10,000 participants. You should be on channel 2. So intergenerational solidarity, this is one of the topics of. So we see the intergenerational solidarity with employment, training, mobility, housing. Those are the four main axes of public policies necessary today. Now, how can we link up generations among intergenerations? I mean, how can we reconnect generations? There are just as many examples as countries and examples of public policies at the national level. So, and also as many examples around the. Madam, can you hear me? And before giving the floor, can you hear me? Can you hear me? And so. Yeah, okay. So we'll have the, let me introduce the speaker, Sylvain Rabuel, who is the president of Domusvie, which is an international company for senior homes, you know, inclusive homes. We'll see how. Mrs. Manjula Pradip, Foundation WAVE, and later on we will ask you, Madame, to introduce your foundation. Pascal Imbert, your co-founder and manager of Wavestone, which is a consulting firm in management and transformation of businesses and organization. And I think you are also public in the Paris Stock Exchange. So you will see if it helps to work on a daily basis. And Björn Corridon, who is CEO of and the chief editor of Borsen. Is that the correct pronunciation? I hope so, Borsen, which is an economic, liberal economic daily newspaper from Danish, right? Okay, good. So far so good. So rules of the game. We got about 55 minutes for the discussion. You will have 4 minutes each to introduce the discussion. But Hippolyte, first, a general introduction, set the frame. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you all. So let me start, maybe, by mentioning a couple of images. First would be what happened last week in France with, well, the advent on TV screen, well, on social network of young population angry, which expressed its rejection to our society, the need to break things. Very striking images. I could also talk about the pension reform, which has been perceived as a sort of advantage given to seniors and sacrifice for the middle-age category to the benefit of the senior citizens. I could talk also about some environmental militant or people who are quite, you know, which turn their commitment into a intergeneration war and the blaming of previous generation, the OK boomers, you know, which in a way has prohibited, which blocks any discussion and which transfers the responsibility of the current environment situation to the previous generation. So when the word generations come into discussion, there is some kind of a Pavlovian reflex, and then we could believe that there is some kind of a immediate conflict and you want to stage a conflict between generations. I've been working on this topic for years, and I don't believe in that. I've expressed myself on that, but even I cannot not see that this image of a conflict does exist in representations, and it is very powerful. Now, the purpose of our session today is to show that intergeneration relations are wider, richer than what we could think, especially today, you know, they're aware from a binary vision. This is why I'm very happy to have this panel, the international panel, and all the speakers will talk to us about all the dimensions of relations between generations. First one is family. It is within families that the intergenerational link is established. Then, second dimension is the state, because the state will socialize a large number of public expenditures, which are, of course, intergenerational. Think about public expenditures for education, for pensions, you know, and care of, you know, reduced mobility people and so on and so forth. So all this goes to the state, but there is also the market, businesses, company. I mean, you spend 30, 35, 40 years of your life, you know, and you may change your business, the business you work for with. So it's, again, there are generation issues there. So we'll have speakers who will talk about French experience, but also international experience on the three dimensions. First, intergeneration is very rich. And do not look just at the family dimension. Don't look just at we look at all the dimensions together, and this is what we try to do while preparing the session. And another point which is crucial is that intergenerational is not unidirectional. It's not what can we do for the youth, what could we do for should we do for the seniors, and so on and so forth. Each time we have to see the relation as a relation that goes in two directions. And I think this is the key for the generation, for general society, which should be peaceful. Thank you. Thank you for your introduction, very precise introduction, which sets the stage of our discussion. Thank you, Hippolyte Dalbis. Now, Sylvain Rabuel. Now, let's go into the kitchen directly. Domusvi, practical case, how okay, Domusvi, yes, thank you. How can you, if you look at how it functions, the society company function, how are the intergeneration relations taking place? Is it an issue as such? Domusvi, we are European expert in elderly homes, you know, services, and home care teams. Just to give you an order of magnitude, we help about 80,000 elderly people in Europe. Half of them in our homes, half of them in their home, in their household. Intergeneration, well, we are an intergenerational company because we help and we welcome elderly people, and those are people who've at least 2-3 generations who will take care of them. So this intergenerational link, we see it, you know, because these people are taken care of by very young people sometimes. So it is our know-how to maintain that, to create that, and foster that. And I fully agree with Hippolyte's observation on the generation conflict. It does not exist. It's wrong, this perception, which is still very pregnant. But if we were to refer to the COVID crisis, which is by definition the most severe crisis our societies have experienced in the last few years, and especially for us, players of the, you know, we deal with elderly patients, you know, this was a major crisis. Well, we saw an amazing link between generations. I mean, in our company, for example, the commitment of our employees towards the residents, senior residents, was amazing, unprecedented. Teams in which tens of institutions locked themselves down with the residents so as to help them, take care of them without causing you know, without bringing the pandemics within the institutions. It was a kind of double lockdown. They were locked down in their work and locked down in our homes. You know, they were disconnected from their families. I'm talking about caregivers who were like 25, 30 years old, who for months, you know, months locked themselves down with more fragile populations. So it's more than it was a pure solidarity, professional, intergenerational commitment. And the general population of our employees, you know, lock themselves down to protect everybody, you know, the disabled people, elderly or senior citizens. So there is no conflicts as such. We're going to fight against this preconceived idea. Now, second observation, though, is that we should not ignore and just consider that this is it and we're done. But this intergeneration link is threatened in the long term because, as you say, it is based on intra-family links. Today you got two, population, very young and senior patient, which are both isolated. You know, the young ones can't find a job, and the senior citizens are isolated because they're too old and and they're helping. You know, this family support has to be is at the highest, and the sociology, the individualization of society, the breaking down of families, recomposed families, the geographical distance between members of families will damage the support, intra-family support. So there is a pillar of intergeneration links is threatened because society has evolved. And if you live 300 kilometers away from your parents, you can't help them as you do today if you live next door to them. If you're 300 kilometers from your kids or grandkids, you can't help them as this generation is helping the youngest and the oldest. So there is clearly the need for innovation in companies to promote, foster the intergeneration link, and at the level of the public authorities to structure it, because in terms of trends, it is threatened by the sociological evolution of our societies. We'll see that later on with you, by Sylvain Rabel, that we can't expect just everything for public authorities, and your role is essential as well as good. Mrs. Pradeep, you're founder of the Wavestone Foundation. Among your missions, there is the inclusion of women in society, in the economy fabrics. Now, together with you, Madam, we'll see the international dimension of the topic, and we'll see Nordic countries later on with. But, Madam, you're going to talk to us about a country known for the caste system. Now, India. Is the caste system the Indian system, is it a source of inequalities or equalities between generations?
Thank you for the question. I come from that community which is discriminated because of our social identity, and we are treated as untouchables, impure people, and defiled. So caste system as such is there for last 3,000 years in India and certain parts of South Asia. The point of concern for me as a person from the community is, where does we see the intergenerational linkages and also support for people who are discriminated because of their social identities. Because caste itself has divided us in terms of the occupations which we do, the jobs which we do, and the jobs which are given to us are impure and dirty, like cleaning of human excrements with bare hand. There is no mechanization. My father comes from a family which does the work of cleaning, of skinning dead animals. And there are hardly any opportunities for people from my community, who are around 200 million in India, to grow in the larger economy of the country. We are all, like in India, India has the largest young population in the world. More than 50% people are young in India. But what are the areas of intervention in terms of looking at the global economy vis-a-vis the country like India, which is claiming itself to be moving towards a country towards rapid economic advancement. But I must say that we face a lot of challenges in terms of education and employment, although there are opportunities given to us through the constitution of the country. But there would be very few of us who have got good education. If my father, who was maybe the first generational learner, if he was not educated, I would not have been sitting here and talking to you or speaking to you, because there's a large scale of discrimination because of our caste identity. There is so much of violence. I am a lawyer, I am an advocate, and I'm also, as he introduced me, the organization which I founded 5 years back, but I am in this field for last 3 decades. For 30 years, I am in this field. And I do know the harsh reality in India, and how difficult it is for us as women from the community to go up beyond our boundaries of rigidity or based on our caste, our gender, our class, our religion. And you have to become a rebel if you want to do the work we do in our country, because there is so much of a discrimination in education. Even in the schools, the children are seated separately. In the higher educational institutions, there are youth who are committing suicides, and there is no mechanism to protect them. It's really a difficult world where we are living in the country like India. And when we question to the system, we question to the administration, to the state, we don't get that kind of good response, because the economy which surrounds around is that there is a big divide between the rich and the poor and the middle class. So we live in ghettoized situation. So there is no upper mobility in terms of people who are born as untouchables or the Dalits. And there is so much of restrictions in terms of what you want to do. Like my goal would be to do something where I can live with dignity and self-respect. But the state and the communities who are not from our caste, they pressurize us, impose us to do certain dirty work, certain inhuman work. And when during the COVID times, there were a lot of us who were from my community, who were the frontline workers, and many of them died because they didn't get enough support in terms of medication, in terms of relief. And I think that is something to think about, that during the COVID time, there was a big incident which happened, and it was because they were forced to live in that village by the dominant caste, and where a 19-year-old girl from my community, she was gang raped, and then she was murdered. And if you know about that case, it is called as Hathras incident, and it took us 2.5 years to fight for justice. It's in the northern belt of the country. I come from Gujarat, where the Prime Minister comes from. And I think in that case, I visited the families because they were all put under the radar of the police and the administration. The dead body of the girl was not given to the family members. They burnt the dead body. The state burned the dead body. The chief minister gave the order. And it was a difficult time for all of us, even to help the girl's family, the victim's family. And very few of us were able to reach out to them. So this is what is the justice system in the country. And then you talk about the poor and the have-nots. Most of them are struggling. They are not aware about their rights. So when we talk about economy, when we talk about how you liberate yourself from poverty, from this kind of situation, there are very few opportunities for them to grow as human beings in India. Thank you.
Merci, merci pour ce témoignage très fort, Madame Manuela Pradip. On abordera justement avec vous tout à l'heure la question.
Later on, we'll discuss with you the issue of difference between urban zones and rural areas, which do create differences. Pascal Imbert, co-founder of CEO of Wavestone. Sorry, madam, I made a mistake earlier on about your company. So your institute, now, companies today, how can they be involved in our topic today, that is inequalities between generations? You know, it's a long process. How do you work in that today? You're a privileged observer, I would say. So, well, I'll start with good news. That is, companies keep being very efficient in the intergenerational links. The companies were able to pool or federate generations around a common objective, in both cases around common values. And this is a location between generations, you know, still works. I do not share the optimism of Hippolyte Elbis, but you know what Hippolyte said as introduction. He said, of course, you know, there are different fora where generation function well among themselves. Yesterday, we were listening Herbie and Koch. I could see that the music is still something that federates generation and company are sites where the intergenerational link functions well. It wasn't easy, by the way, in the last 10, 20 years, because there's been some kind of a gap, a shift of values of the young generation, which created tension in companies. We went from models where basically 20 years ago the business was the Sherpa model. I'm young, I join in, I will follow the path of my elders, and I accept to be behind before gaining access to the Graal, to the board, you know, maybe to become a partner. So when I'm a partner, they listen to me, I make decisions, and I'm a new role model for the coming generations. Well, this was completely disrupted, if I could say. It was completely broken, and we are in a mode of operation where companies have to listen, take into account the expectation of young generation straight on at the beginning of their careers. It has to be honest, it has to be meaningful, it has to give a meaning to the young generations, and it has to be honest. That is, it has to walk the talk. I mean, it is not always easy for businesses, but I can see widely that the movement is taking place, and it works. It works, not too badly, actually, and the talent war, you know, is now raging on, you know. You want to recruit talent and keep talents. Now, second comment I wish to make is that, unfortunately, I was not very honest in what I said. How does it work? Well, it does work, but for certain segment of the young generation, I'm talking about talent. Of course, companies did their best to reestablish a link with young, who are well-educated, trained, who graduated, overgraduated, and all companies want to get them, you know. It was critical, we had to do it. Wavestone, like all our clients, we were focused on the fact that we needed the best skilled or qualified talents. But for the others, those who did not, who have no diploma, who were left out of the education system, well, companies don't do much. I mean, you know, we feel powerless in some cases. We think it's not fully our responsibility. And actually, it's something where they will catch up with us, because if the company it does not try to close that gap, which is widening actually within the young generation between those who are in and those who are out, I mean, this will become unbearable for societies. So we have to take over, and as businesses, we'll have to find solutions. Once more, we are so far powerless, but this is no reason not to look for solutions. It's a critical challenge for companies, and it leads me to my last comment. I'm amazed for the last few years about the risk which is growing because the environmental urgency is pushing social dimension to the second row. You know, we've done a lot of things since 2021. We've raised the awareness, environmental awareness, and we got moving, you know, and as manager I can bear witness, companies really got involved. Things are moving. Environmental urgency is something that we're tackling, but it means that slowly the S of CSR is somewhat minored, and recreating hope, you know, solve environmental challenges. Well, this will not take place if we do not reintegrate the other elements of the equation. We'll have a special mention to youth, because there will be the youth could be dynamic too. Now, Björn Corridon, you are a privileged observer of the Nordic country, you know, CEO and chief editor of Borsen, the economic daily newspaper. Is there a specific system in the Nordics in terms of fight against generation conflicts, or the intergenerational management? You know, we often take the Nordic countries as examples for many social aspects. Is there a specific aspect in your regions?
Yes, I certainly think so. And I think in the interest of transparency, I'm a newspaper editor now, but I used to be Danish finance minister for 4 years. So I had skin in the game in terms of delivering public policy. I think what I wanted to bring to the table as introduction here is a view from the Nordics, where I think, at least if you compare the Nordics to a lot of other nations globally, the level of intergenerational justice is comparably high. Public finances are sustainable, so we are able to fund and carry on and develop the welfare state system also in the long term. So that's good for the older generations. We can pay for high-level education and for social security. And I think the point I wanted to make here is really, it's about optimism, but it's actually also about that these issues are more technical than you would sometimes imagine when you look at the demonstrations in the streets and the very heated debates that we are witnessing these years. Because I think the big secret about the Nordics is that what we now appreciate, what we now celebrate, is not something we've had for very long. I mean, if you look back 30 or 35 years, really the situation was not intergenerationally just, and it was not sustainable. So it's been a journey towards sustainability over 30 or 35 years in Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Norway is a special case. And I think if you zoom into how that was done, it was actually a very technical exercise. Because if you take a big issue like intergenerational justice and think about how you fix it, what you quickly conclude is it's not just about one piece of policy or about one specific reform. It's really about coordinating a lot of policies in the labor market, in the economy, in the pension system, in the education system over time. And what the Nordics managed to do was to do that by building a budget process where the way you do annual public budgets take into account the path towards medium-term sustainability and also the structural reforms you need to enact to have the economy grow in a sustainable manner. So building these systems technically in the Nordics actually took us from a very, very challenged situations in the 70s to a very sustainable situation today. And that's why my point here today is that you need to think technically about how you do the boring part of politics, the budgeting, the medium-term planning, to really get fairness in place. I think the next big challenge for the Nordics will be to do so in terms of ecology, in terms of green transition. And coming back to your point, I think again, the key here, the challenge will be to integrate that with what you do in economic policies for growth, for distribution, for justice, for social mobility. And I think the conversation now that what you do for green transition is something different. It's done apart from what you do in economic policies, and there's some contradiction between the two. That's really a dead end. I mean, you need to build an integrated system, and that needs to be integrated with the budget process and with the medium-term planning. And if you can't do that, I think really you will have a conflict between ecological transition, ecological sustainability, and the economic part of things. I think that's the big challenge for the Nordics, and hopefully we will be able to solve that. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much for that testimony. So, Björn, you were talking about planning versus the Nordic countries. Now, Sylvain Rebuel. Sorry, I was having a chat with my neighbor. Yes, let's go back to the subject itself. We were talking about companies. Björn's talked about planning. So there's a reference to public powers there. So given what you said later on, we need public powers, but not everything relies on public powers. Concretely, what are you expecting? Well, we're focusing on what we can do ourselves. We've taken 3 initiatives that come from the intergenerational relations. One focuses on employment. Our profession requires a lot of human resources and will require even more human resources in the future. So we insert young people into the professional world. We recruit a lot of staff based on their qualifications. We certify them by validating their experience as well. We've got 1,000 in France, 1,000 young people who, without qualifications, who we take on, and who they become orderlies in different establishments. We've got 300 establishments in France. There are hospitality places for dependents. So we act as a school for young people without any qualifications. And in this way, we can deal with the question of the lack of medical professionals in this sector. But it goes even further than that, no? Because you organize a series of initiatives. So we took strong commitments with respect to care staff, employing people of over 50. There'll be more and more of these. So this was a great resource in jobs like ours. 35% of our employees are over the age of 50. So they have resources that younger people can't offer. Above the age of 50, we have employees who are ready to work during the school holidays, for example. Now, we have a profession where we have to be alongside our elderly people 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So having over 50s means we've got a very precious resource, because we're talking about employees who can work at times when other generations can't. So keeping them in a job is a substantial challenge for us. It concerns 35% of our employees, and this will go up. And what about for younger generation? There's something that's really great. You've got mini nurseries. Yes, we're trying to invest intergenerationally in therapeutic projects. Each established has a therapeutic project for elderly people that it hosts. And then there's an intergenerational focus with infants being able to go to nursing homes where there is a nursery for them. So they are linked via activities, food workshops, creative workshops with the elderly people. So this is good for the elderly people, and it's very much focused on care. And the last initiative, we created the Musvig Foundation for Solidarity between Generations a few years ago. The idea was to facilitate contact between young people and the elderly in a practical way. The last initiative was to open up the restaurants in our nursing homes to students suffering from vulnerability. So students can come and eat in our canteens, our nursing home canteens, in exchange for which they spend some time with the elderly residents and talk to them. So they give of their time, yes, with our elderly people. So can all companies set up this kind of system? I think all companies should do that, because I need more and more employees. And my main problem, it's true for the next 10 years, it won't be finding elderly people, customers, it's finding employees. As a socially focused company, I have to do everything to insert the youngest people and qualify them. It's in my interest to maintain the older members of society in employment. It's for the common good of humanity, and this can coincide with the interest of a company. Pascal Ambert, do you understand what our gentleman here is saying? What do you have to say about it? Yes, companies can do lots of things, and not just in societal actions, in foundations. They can do lots of things as part of their core jobs. But this means finding solutions that go beyond the company, finding solutions so that collective actions can be carried out in a branch, in a subsidiary. So this is what I was saying earlier on. We're in a company where, there's a hypertrophy of responsibility of the public powers. We're seeing this when it comes to critical challenges. So companies have a certain efficiency. They can move more swiftly. They can implement actions that will provide very pragmatic solutions. So in the field of learning, for example, there are still many things that can be done. And we're seeing that this is one of the means of, attracting different generations. So we're in the south, we're countries in the south. Let me come back to the international situation that is that Mrs. Pradeep was mentioning. Mrs. Pradeep, how can we improve intergenerational dialogue? You were talking about India, the caste system. You have a very broader vision, but let's stay with India. The country has just overtaken China. It's a continent that is increasing in population and other things. Are you confident? Are you optimistic about the wish of politicians in India? And what about companies? Do they have a role to play when it comes to the emancipation of this intergenerational dialogue in India?
It's a very important question which you have raised. The role of companies is very important because India is now moving towards privatization of most of our work. Like the public sector opportunities is shrinking. And that also is a challenge for those who have got some kind of benefits through the affirmative action policy given in the constitution. So that is something, a warning for all of us, because when the companies, they set up their enterprise, they tend to also see that what is your social background. It's not so easy in India to get jobs. They tend to find out what is your caste, what is your religion. It's not only the issue of caste, but also of religious minorities in India. So when the companies decide on not on how do they succeed in their goal in terms of making the company more affordable to those who don't have those opportunities. So there are no policies which are laid down by the government in terms of giving that scope for people who are discriminated because of their social identity. So the private companies, they tend to take those people who are from their caste or from their religion, and that is very threatening in the context of India being the top most populated country in the world, because see, the divide is so strong that the younger generation, they are losing their hope. They are not able to get that kind of a signal that maybe I am highly qualified, but my caste or my religion is a barrier in terms of getting a dignified job. So then that also brings out to that fact that within the employment spaces, are there policies by the government laid down to ensure that there is no discrimination based on your social identity? And I don't think so. That's not happening in our country. And when I talk about women, how do they see themselves? Because in India, women are educated, but they are not employed. That is the fact in the country, that majority of the women who are highly qualified, not only from like in my community, there are very few women who are highly qualified, but in other communities also, the women don't go out of their homes, even if they are intelligent and smart, because the patriarchy is so strong in our country, and we don't have that kind of scope for women to grow as entrepreneurs or to run companies. You hardly have women in high positions in the country, and that's a state of affairs. So how do we deal with those issues is also that there is no dialogue which is happening with the state and with the organizations like us. So when we discuss about these issues, they are seen as something where you are maligning the image of your country, or you are questioning the role of the government, and you are talking about lack of rule of law. And I think these are the areas which needs to be addressed by the international companies, because in the name of globalization, we have a lot of companies who are coming from other parts of the world to India, but there are no scope for discussing on these issues.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for that testimony, that additional testimony. Let's stay on the international scene with Björn Corridon. Perhaps you'd like to react to what Mrs. Pradeep has said and tell us about what happens in Nordic countries, and tell us about planning as well, with the very important role of the involvement of finance and energy transition, and how all of that fits in with transition. And let's talk about the intergenerational dialogue. You have to train young people. The elder members of society can perhaps help them with their education. What is your overall view of that subject?
I actually think the debate here, although we come from very different backgrounds and geographies, links together nicely, because I tried to introduce, well, a government perspective, a Nordic inspiration, and some of that is about planning. But I really want you to understand the term planning right. It's not, well, the experience of the Nordics and also some of the, well, successes of the Nordics is not about the state really running the transition in a very direct manner. It's really about setting incentives right for the labor market and for companies. And I think, well, a lot of the perspectives we've had here on the stage today has been about, I mean, how companies, how communities can really push this development, the fairness between generations, the sustainability from generation to generation, well, push that bottom up. But I think what also comes out on stage is that, well, doing that entirely bottom up is actually difficult, because to do it in a manner that is consistent and to do it in a manner that is coherent with new objectives coming in, not just economic objectives, not just social mobility objectives, not just distribution objectives, but also ecological objectives, and in a more complex world, is really difficult, even for a very progressive company. And I think we've seen large global companies taking on more responsibility in the past 5, 10, 20 years. I think the concept of stakeholder capitalism is really becoming firmly entrenched in a lot of nations. I'm really appreciative about that. I think we need that. But I think you need modern governments to put incentives right. So we need to basically reward sustainable behavior from companies and to punish the opposite. And to get that in order in a manner that is consistent across various topics is really a difficult task. And that takes skilled policymakers. And I think we need to learn from each other in terms of how we do that.
La puissance publique très...
So public powers that are still very important. So we'll come back to the audience for questions. But Hippolyte, before that, let me ask Mr. Rabiul a last question. Should we give the floor to the audience, or would you like to say a few words first? Because we don't have much time for conclusion. Perhaps we give a conclusion first? I'll give a conclusion when it's time for a conclusion. So it's important to conclude about the conclusion, yes. Yes, I will let my colleague conclude. So given the different examples, the different foreign examples, how can we build for tomorrow? As policymakers, as decision takers, how can we build for the right intergenerational relations? Well, I think it's difficult to talk about this generally. I can shed some light on what concerns me as a company head. There's the logic of aging. We're talking about digital challenges, population growth challenges, and the aging of our population, which is another challenge that we've got to plan. We've got to think ahead for the future. What's very striking is the present difficulty of public powers with respect to anticipating and preparing for these future times. In terms of aging, this is really going to weigh down on the intergenerational question in 7, 8, 10 years' time. 30–40% of employees in companies will be over 50, and that's going to create a considerable imbalance in economic life, in social life, and in the life of citizens generally. So all of that has to be anticipated. Aging is not a disease. Aging can be a wealth and a resource. But we're seeing, nevertheless, at least in the Western world, that planning is difficult, even in that specific field. And Mrs. Predic can tell us about this. It's very difficult for public powers to project into the long term and to make preparatory choices. So the only thing that I can say by way of conclusion is that the society needs to plan ahead so that these intergenerational shocks are beneficial. So very quickly, Pascal Imbert. Just a quick comment. I entirely agree with what you said about the necessity to have a certain stimulation on behalf of public powers. But there's something else. There's another party that plays an important role, and that is finance. So So we are listed on the stock exchange. I'm seeing this directly. I'm saying this among my customers. Finance has seized the environmental question, and there's a combat looking at ideas. It's not greenwashing. No. No, I think that the effects, we're going beyond greenwashing now. There are still attempts to greenwash, but as an observer of the world of corporate organizations, the decisions being made are breakthrough decisions. So the question today is going to be how to reintegrate the generational subject and the social subject inside the equation. So I would like to call on the Cercle des Économistes to play its role as intellectual leaders and to lead the battle so that we can show how complex the equation is and how it can be dealt with in a 360-degree manner. Hippolyte, that's a great conclusion before we can hand over to the audience. So I think what's been said, it's very rich. The relationship between generations, but we're talking about treasures that are also fragile. So we've distinguished between preserving our intergenerational relations, and that will help us in the future to have a strong society, an inclusive society. That's very important. And we mustn't separate them. On the one hand, we don't have the intergenerational aspects, and then on the other hand, the social aspects. Let me take a very simple example. In the audience, I can see that there are 2 or 3 people who are over the age of 35, so you might be concerned. So the case of mentoring, tutoring, that's something that works very well. Supporting a young person, guiding a young person, not necessarily somebody who's a member of your family. So somebody who benefits from intergenerational support. We know that it works. There are many associations that propose this. And being with that person, somebody with whom you can discuss, it does bring offer a lot of advantages. There are lots of people who had difficulty becoming a member of society, but because they had a mentor, because they had a tutor, whatever the name you want to use, a senior member of society helping them, with somebody with experience, we know that it's a model that works. So there are possibilities. So it's important to have intergenerational relations outside of what we have in companies or what we have thanks to state or in families. It's something that works. So let's go out to those associations. Let's go and meet young people, because that's how we can improve things. In the Cercle des Économistes, I know that there are questions in the audience, so can I hand over to the Cercle des Économistes? So the Cercle des Économistes and its actions are important. Yes, we're trying to have a conference where it's not just saying that as of a certain age we can take the floor. It's also young people that will be arriving. There are lots of things that are being done at our own level. Thank you very much, Hippolyte, for that conclusion. Now we can open up the floor for the debate. And I'm sure that you're over 35. So we'll bring a microphone to you in the second row. Can I ask you to raise your hand if you have a question? I can't promise that we'll be able to take all of the questions. We only have 6 or 7 minutes. Please introduce yourself and ask a succinct question. Thank you. And in that way, we'll be able to give the floor to as many people. Ministre, I'm a student in political science. Thank you for letting me to ask my question. I want to go back to what Mr. Albi was saying. I believe that there's a kind of mutual mistrust between generations, where a generation facing many challenges, environmental, socio-economic challenges, and faced with these challenges, we need to be able to speak. And it's difficult for us to have the feeling that, our elders don't want to listen to us. We don't have your knowledge, we don't have your experience, we're not questioning that. However, it's more of a request than a question. Don't just remind us that we don't know. Be present to teach us. Thank you. We can give you a round of applause. So you were saying that it's a request rather than a question. Would somebody like to react? So another question. I think there's a gentleman over here We'll bring you a microphone. Same process. So please introduce yourself quickly. Yes, hello. Let me introduce myself. I'm from Nice. I'm in charge of an association that supports college students and lyceum students with their school work. You didn't talk about the contribution of volunteering to, for example, using retirees. I think that's something for the future. In 1990, 1980, if we retired at 62, we're already tired. In 2022, 2023, when we retire, we still have some strength. We can still give to society. And I think that in the future, the public powers will have to make sure that these retirees are managed, especially retirees who still have something to give back to a society. In my association, I've been lucky. I've been able to have an engineer, one engineer from the SNCF who found that he could do another job. He could be a teacher, a genuine teacher. And with the reform today, I've just seen that there are 20 graduates who graduated in mathematics thanks to that person who is in my association. What's the name of your association? SOS Réussite Scolaire. It's in Nice, created by the National Education for working with people in difficulty. There was nobody in a specific neighborhood to help these school children. Well done, well done. So you have the role of the Lord. And let's talk internationally as well. So the aging of the population is a great resource for society. Well, you're right. We're going to have thousands, tens of thousands of people who are supposedly elderly, but who have an awful lot of experience and know-how, and who are doing very well from a health point of view. There's only one thing missing. You know, they need to be made available to society. So in our company, we want a kind of a Parcoursup for pensions. So, you know, a kind of a platform where retirees can offer their services and meet up with other people with needs in society. We've got 2 minutes left. We can't go beyond the 2 minutes, so please be very succinct. Mrs. Pradip, what about associations? What can you say, and lords?
With you. See, when I was very young, the same situation happens where my parents were not ready to listen to me. So I think what I have tried to do is that through my organization, I train young people to gain confidence and to heal themselves and to question in their own families and to develop their own skills so that they can become leaders in their own communities. And most of them are activists and also social workers, and mainly young women. I think that's very important. And I think the intergenerational aspect is where you can heal each other. And I think that healing process is so important so that you have a broader outlook towards the society. Thank you.
Alors,
One last international look, and that will be the end. You can continue to discuss after the session informally. Bjorn, perhaps the 2 points that were brought up, you can say about them?
One final piece of advice for the young person that challenged the panel. I think when you introduce yourself into these discussions as a young generation with us as an older generation, I think the trick you need to use is to really turn our own rhetorics against ourselves. When we in a panel of former politicians, corporates, NGOs talk about sustainability, it's really about how we sustain what we do for you to take it over in a manner that will serve your needs. So you should, instead of making this a discussion between generations, try to challenge us in terms of, do we actually do what it takes to deliver over the society where we live from the benefits we have now in a shape that will offer you the same possibilities that we had. So use our own terms, use a sustainability discussion to challenge us instead of making it a conflict.
Merci beaucoup. Merci infiniment pour ces témoignages. Je pense qu'on peut applaudir.
Thank you very much for all of those testimonies. I think we can give the panel a round of applause, and you can stay if you have time and you want to go through things more. Thank you. Thank you to everybody. There are other sessions.